Imagine spending decades waiting for your final day. Years of appeals, prayers, and isolation leading to one final moment, the execution chamber. Today, we explore the stories of some of the oldest people executed in the United States. Men who spent decades on death row, faced their sentence, and left behind chilling final words and curious last meals. This is the tragic, somber reality of criminal justice system. The U.S. remains one of the few developed nations that still actively uses the death penalty. Though the majority of executions take place relatively quickly after sentencing, some cases drag on for decades. In this video, we dive deep into the stories of 6 individuals who, after spending decades on death row, face their fate as some of the oldest people ever executed. Welcome to True Criminal. Number 1. Brandon Astor Jones, State, Georgia. Our first story takes us to Georgia, where Brandon Astor Jones was convicted of murder in a robbery gone wrong in 1979. He and his accomplice, Van Roosevelt Solomon, broke into a convenience store intending to rob it, but the robbery ended with the store manager, Roger Tackett, losing his life. Jones was sentenced to death later that year, and Solomon was executed in 1985. But for Jones, his time on death row stretched far longer. He spent over 30 years waiting for his execution, surviving multiple appeals and retrials. Jones' case took an unusual turn when it was discovered that jurors in his trial had brought a Bible into the deliberation room, leading to his death sentence being overturned in 1989. However, in 1997, after another trial, he was once again sentenced to death. In February 2016, Brandon Jones was finally scheduled for execution. He didn't request a special last meal, so he was given the standard prison meal of chicken, rice, collard greens, and cornbread. His execution was delayed for 45 minutes, as officials struggled to find a vein to insert the IV. But in the end, at 12:46 a.m., he was declared dead by lethal injection. When asked for his final words, Jones chose silence. He made no public statement but accepted a final prayer and left behind a recorded message for his family. His long, drawn-out journey through the justice system had finally come to an end. Number 2. James Barney Hubbard, State, Alabama. Next, we meet James Barney Hubbard, a man whose story shocked many due to his advanced age at the time of his execution. In 2004, Hubbard was 74 years old when he was put to death in Alabama, making him the oldest person executed in modern U.S. history. Hubbard's story begins in 1957 when he was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 20 years in prison. After serving his time, he was released, but just a year later, he committed another murder, this time of a woman who had befriended him and supported his re-entry into society. Her name was Lillian Montgomery. Hubbard moved into Montgomery's home after his release from prison, but one night after drinking whiskey together, she was found dead with 3 gunshot wounds. Hubbard claimed it was a suicide, but all evidence pointed to him as the killer. When his execution date came in 2004, Hubbard requested a simple last meal: 2 medium-boiled eggs, bacon, sliced tomatoes, and a juice. It's hard to imagine what was going through his mind as he ate that final meal. On August 5, 2004, Hubbard was executed by lethal injection. His daughter watched from an adjacent room as he maintained eye contact with her until the moment he passed. He offered no final words, no signs of remorse. His execution marked the end of a long and complicated life, a man who lived 74 years, half of which were spent in prison. And yet, his story leaves us with more questions than answers. Number 3. John Albert Boltz, State, Oklahoma. John Albert Bolt's story is one of deep family tragedy. In 1984, Boltz, after a night of heavy drinking, murdered his 23-year-old stepson, Doug Kirby, in a fit of rage. The incident began when Boltz got into a heated argument with his wife and stormed out, later calling his stepson to meet him at his trailer. What followed was a horrifying scene. Bolts attacked Kirby with a knife, stabbing him to death. According to witnesses, Bolts had shouted threats to his wife, saying, "I'm going to cut your dear boy's head off." The gruesome nature of the crime shocked the small community. After spending more than 2 decades on death row, Bolts was offered a final meal of fried chicken, potato wedges, baked beans, and apple pie. His choice was simple, but his final words were anything but. In 2006, as Bolts faced his execution, he declared, "This is a moment of joy for me and a moment of sadness. I know I'm going to a better place, but I think of all those who brought me here and what awaits them." It was a mixture of regret and religious conviction, perhaps hoping for forgiveness in his final moments. Number 4. Clarence Ray Allen, State, California. Clarence Ray Allen was no ordinary death row inmate. Even while imprisoned for organizing a murder in the 1970s, Allen continued to mastermind crimes from behind bars. His case drew attention not only for the brutality of his crimes, but also for his age. At 76, Allen was one of the oldest men to be executed in the United States. Allen was convicted for orchestrating the murder of a young woman, Mary Sue Kitts, who had threatened to expose his earlier crimes. But even while incarcerated, Allen conspired to eliminate witnesses who could testify against him. Before his execution in 2006, Allen requested an unusual last meal: buffalo meat, fried bread, and a bucket of KFC chicken. The imagery of such a meal raises the question, was this comfort food from a different era of his life, or was it a final indulgence before meeting his fate? Allen's last words were as striking as his crimes. "Hoka hey, it's a good day to die." This was a traditional Native American battle cry, signifying readiness to meet death. With those final words, Clarence Ray Allen's life came to a close, leaving behind a legacy of violence that continued even after his incarceration. Number 5. Walter Leroy Moody Jr., State, Alabama. Finally, we turn to the case of Walter Leroy Moody Jr., a man who at 83 became the oldest prisoner executed in U.S. history since the death penalty's reinstatement. Moody was convicted of bombing federal judge Robert Vance in 1989, killing him instantly and severely injuring his wife. Moody's crime spree didn't end with Judge Vance. Just 2 days later, civil rights attorney Robert E. Robinson was killed in a similar explosion. It was determined that Moody had mailed multiple bombs to divert attention from his own legal troubles, hoping to frame others for the crimes. Moody's final meal was straightforward: a Philly cheesesteak, a Dr. Pepper, and a handful of M&Ms. After decades of life on death row, his meal request seemed almost mundane. When asked for his final words, Moody declined to speak. His silence in those final moments stood in stark contrast to the violence and chaos his actions had caused years before. And with that, on April 19, 2018, Walter Leroy Moody Jr. was executed by lethal injection.